Hey fam, in today's video, talking hydrometers. Hey garden family, it's your girl Mskraft, aka the Geeky Gardener. I hope you liked my new intro. I have to give my props to a very dear friend of mine. He started to watch some of my videos and he's like, I got something for you. So he created my new intro and I absolutely love it. So I hope you guys do too. So that's going to be my new intros. So to my dear friend David, I thank you. I love you. And yeah, that's going to be me going forward. All right, guys. So getting into the topic of the day, again, we are talking hydrometers. This is what it looks like. It looks like a big thermometer. It usually comes in two flavors, either uncolor coded or color coded. And if you are new to the process, I'm going to highly suggest getting a color coded one because it's going to make it so much easier to read. And as I go through the steps in the process and talking about how to use this, you'll see why. They also come in either glass or plastic. The glass tends to be a little more accurate, but as you can guess, it's a little more fragile. So again, if you're new to this, I would suggest going with the plastic. It's also a little bit cheaper too. Okay. Any kit worth its weight of salt is also going to include a beaker, which is what you're going to use your sample in. And I'm sorry about the light, guys. I still haven't figured that part of the process out yet, but you know, there you go. You get the general idea. So it's going to give you a beaker where you can put your samples in. It's going to give you some sort of cup to take your sample from. But again, we talked about in the 101 video, which I'll leave a link to somewhere up there. It's better to use a turkey baster or a wine thief so you don't introduce oxygen, but a kit will still come with something like this. And of course, it's going to come with a cleaner. Okay, so as you can stay on top of your sanitation. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Okay, here we go. How to use a hydrometer for winemaking. Again, in my humblest of opinions, because I am nowhere near a wine master, just a wine lover. Oh, speaking of which, before we get started, guava. Can't talk about wine without having a glass of wine, right? But again, in my humblest of opinion, I think one of the most important tools that you will use in the art of making wine is your hydrometer. It can tell you a ton of information from beginning to end on making the best wine you possibly can. So what a hydrometer is and why it's important. It is an instrument that measures the density of a liquid. That means how thick it is. When you add sugar to water, it becomes viscous, it becomes syrupy, it becomes thicker or denser. So the magic of using a hydrometer is to be able to measure the amount of potential alcohol based on how thick or how dense the water is that you're using to make your alcohol. The tool actually has 3 different scales, which we'll go into, that you can use to actually make those measurements and those decisions. But basically, the art of winemaking is being able to manipulate fluid to sugar to yeast, and using this tool to actually measure what your finished product is going to be like. Okay, now actually how to read a hydrometer. Again, I mentioned there's usually 3 different scales that you can use either separately or in conjunction with each other. The first one is a Brix scale, and that is a numerical value to a level of sweetness. You may have heard Brix used in other realms like candy or fruit. But basically all it is just measuring how sweet something is. Specific gravity measures the density of the liquid, as we spoke to before, how thick the fluid is, and how buoyant that fluid is with whatever it is that you have dissolved in it is. And then the third scale is your ABV, or the alcohol by volume percent. And as it says, it measures how much potential alcohol your fluid could possibly have. Okay, now here's a better view of if you were to crack open a hydrometer, pull out the paper and roll it out flat, this is what it looks like. And again, this is why I think for beginners, a color-coded one will make things so much easier when it comes time to actually use it and read it. Because again, where is it? You can see just from the picture here, the numbers are kind of small, and it's going to be floating and bobbing like this in your liquid. So color coding gives you a range, which will make things a little bit better to read, okay? So on this side of your scale is the specific gravity reading, which is usually 1 point something as you read it. Right smack in the middle is going to be your alcohol by volume, or ABV. And on this side is your Brix. Now, when you usually talk to people about winemaking, they're going to usually speak to your specific gravity, speak to your specific gravity. Secondary, they'll talk to you about the ABV. When you actually get into the art of becoming a wine master, that's when the Brix starts coming into play. So for our purposes in our 101 winemaking, we're really going to be focusing on the specific gravity and the ABV. Okay. Now, if you notice here, I have a big old arrow pointed to the 1.0. That's usually where you will find plain old water. The reason why water does register on the hydrometer is because there are some minerals in your water, unless you're using RO, but we're not even going to go down there. Like I said, I'm trying very, very hard to stay out of the weeds, okay? But yeah, water usually register about 1 on the SG. And how you read this is when you're beginning to make your wine, the denser the liquid is, the higher the hydrometer will float in that liquid. So you want to be able to match your input of sugar along the bottom half of your hydrometer, and it clearly marks what areas you want to be in depending on what beverage you want to yield in the very end. So for example, here in this blue area here, beer is going to be in the 1.04 through 1.06 range is where you want to be able to get that hydrometer to float to with the addition of sugar to water, or liquid, in this case will be our juice. And that in turn will yield somewhere between 5 and about 9%, which is about where you want your beer to be anyway. In this yellow range here is where the range you want to be in for table wine. It's going to be a little more drier on finish in. So that's going to be 1.07 to 1.09, somewhere up in there is where you want to be able to start with. And then your dessert wines, which are going to have a sweeter finish, you want them to be well over 1.1 in this red range here. Now the colors may differ, but the ranges will always be the same. For our purposes, we're going to hover right in between here around 11 to 12% for what we're aiming for. So our starting gravity is going to be somewhere in this range right here. I hope the arrow is showing, but right up in here. Now, as yeast do their thing, they're eating the sugars, it's happy, 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 it's belching out carbon dioxide and pooping out alcohol, everything's happy, the amount of sugar in the liquid is going to reduce. So the liquid is going to become less dense. So the less dense the liquid is, the lower the hydrometer will sink. So as just kind of following my arrow here, as the yeast eats, right up in here, it should be out of sugar. And that's about where you want a wine to finish. And just underneath that, in this yellow area right here, we want a little sweetness if we were to do beer. So we would want to stop the yeast from completely exhausting all of the sugar and finish right about in here. Okay, but this is a video about wine, so we wanted to eat it all up, and this is how we measure it. Okay, so again, you heard me talking about specific gravity and how people in the arts actually talk. Using a reading when you first dump your sugar and just prior to you adding your yeast, you're going to want to measure the liquid. You want to measure the density. So that number that we come up with is going to be called your OG, or your original gravity reading, the very first reading you have before you do anything else to make wine, okay, or your starting point. Okay. After fermentation is complete, usually about 7 to 10 days. Rough ballpark, but not exact. It just depends on a lot of different factors, but rough ballpark 7 to 10 days. You're going to take 2 final readings. You're going to take your initial final reading, which will give you a value, and then you will continue to take readings until you get 2 readings exactly the same back to back. And that will be your final gravity reading. And that's when fermentation is considered complete. Your yeast can do no more. That's if you're drying it out. Your yeast can do no more. Okay, so how you use that gravity to calculate what your alcohol by volume is, excuse me, pardon me, wine break. You take your original gravity minus your finest gravity, and you multiply it by 131.25, and that'll give you your alcohol by volume percent. Now, please do not ask me what the 131.25 is. I just know it's an industry factor. Somebody bigger, smarter, been in that game longer than I have to know exactly what that number is. And if you're really serious about this art, I suggest you go and research it, but don't ask me. I just know what the number is. So for example, and I kind of want you to keep hold of this particular range right here, because that's the range we're going to be shooting for when we make our wine together. We're going to want a starting range of about 1.092, somewhere up in there. And we're going to let it dry out to 1, back to a level of no sugars. And that should yield us about 12% or so. Okay, that's the goal. Okay, so I'm sure you're asking yourself, yeah, I got this tool now. How much sugar do I add in order to get that reading that I want? Well, on average, 1 pound of sugar per 1 gallon of liquid will give you about 6%, 5.96% alcohol by volume. And about a pound of sugar is about 2.2 cups, a little more than 2 1/4 cups per pound. In this case, we're making a gallon of wine, so we're looking, and we want to be about 6%. So we're going to look at starting at least with 2 pounds of sugar and adjusting as we go, as we're taking our measurements, okay? So again, this is where the hydrometer comes into play. If you want to get to a precise value, you're going to start with the lowest amount of sugar that you would think you would need to get to the alcohol by volume you need. And then as you're taking your readings using the hydrometer, you add a little bit more sugar. Now, again, easier to add sugar than to subtract sugar. But all you would have to do is just, if you over sweeten it for whatever reason, you can leave it and shoot for a higher volume, or add water to dilute the amount of sugar in there again and get it to the range that you want. That's kind of how you use the tool to kind of play with your ingredients. Okay. Okay. But I don't want to do math. We got something for you too. If you don't really want to do the math, you are going to still have to take your readings. But when you do your original gravity reading, you're going to take that and write it down somewhere. When we're done and take our final gravity reading, you're going to take that and write that down somewhere. You're going to go to a website that has a calculator and enter those two numbers, and it will automatically calculate the alcohol by volume for you. This is one of my favorite sites here that you can go to. And I'll have this presentation available for anybody that wants a copy of it. Just shoot me an email at mskraft123@yahoo.com, and I'll have that in the description as well. And we'll get a copy of this to you. If you want to know how much sugar to actually add, they do have alcohol by volume matrices. Yeah, matrices. That will tell you exactly how much sugar to add to your volume of liquid to yield the alcohol percentage that you want. And here is another one that I like. Now, don't be fooled. This one is for moonshine, but you're not going to be making moonshine, right? You're making wine. But the premise is still exactly the same. Moonshine, wine, beer, mead, all of them, they all kind of start the same and use the exact same tool to measure their alcohol content. And if you really don't want to do any math, just follow a recipe. There's tons of them out there. And the people who have come up with these recipes, have already gone through the trouble of doing the measuring and can tell you about where your alcohol is going to finish if you follow the recipe exactly. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation there. Again, I believe this is very important for you to be able to hit those numbers that you want. You got to be able to measure. You don't really want to be guessing, especially your first time around. Once you get used to things and, like I said, develop your own recipes, you have a general idea of where things are finishing, but learn the basics. Learn to walk before you start to fly. Understand the why before you tweak the how. That's going to be our mantra going forward, people, okay? So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to either drop me a comment below or shoot me an email if you want some more specific back and forth at my email address, mskraft123@yahoo.com. And please keep an eye out for a follow-up video where we're actually going to talk about yeast. I will put a link somewhere up there to it, but that's also going to be an important topic of conversation before we get ready to make our wine on Sunday. I'm so excited. I cannot wait. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you found some value of this. Again, if you got any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and I will see you on the flip side. Love you guys.